Hey guys, welcome back. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not actually dead. I am still alive. I've just been super busy. But I got a job in the workshop today, and I figure I'll share it with you. To be honest, I've kind of lost my YouTube mojo a little bit. I've been so busy the last couple of months, and it's just literally I've been firefighting with work, and I'm just trying to keep everybody happy, and making videos hasn't really been on my list of priorities, but things have started to calm down slightly now, so I figure I'll give this YouTube thing a little bit more of my attention. So I've got a Black Bird here, CBR1100XX to be exact, one of the last of them before they stopped making them. It's done, how many miles has it done? It's done 26,000 miles. It's got a rattly cam chain, or the beginnings of a rattly cam chain. Let me start it and see if you can hear it on that mic. I'm not sure whether it's going to pick it up that well. So now it's come off choke and the RPM's dropped a little bit. You might be able to hear that slight shattering in the background. Hear that then? Kind of a lot of you all know what a cam chain noise sounds like, but it's a very distinctive rattle. It's kind of how you'd imagine it to be. Imagine the little Ivo chain thrashing around inside a bean can. So I'll show you on the bench now, I'll show you the parts I've got to do the job, and then the idea is I'll just sort of interrupt my work with some shots through the camera and just tell you a little bit about what's going on. Some of you will hopefully find it interesting and maybe learn the odd little thing. Anyway, I'll show you on the bench now of the parts I'm going to use. Okay, so these are the bits I'm going to use. Obviously genuine. We don't do pattern parts on the main shop there. Yeah, so down here. Don't do pattern parts inside an engine ever, in my opinion, unless they're sort of performance-y bits. But for a job like this, you just use genuine bits. The genuine Honda tensioner, gasket for the tensioner, cam cover gasket. It's worth mentioning that you probably, if you were doing this job yourself, you wouldn't bother replacing this gasket. It's a rubber gasket, and it can be, within reason, it can be reused. But doing it sort of professionally, commercially, I'm not taking the chance on reusing the gasket, because I just, I obviously don't want an oil leak. The last thing I want is a customer ringing me saying, there's oil leaking out of my bike. That's to physically get the chain out. You'll see as I do the job, to physically get the chain out, the front right hand engine cover's got to come off, the pulsar cover where the ignition pickup lives, cam chain drops down and comes out through that cover, so that cover's got to come off, new gasket for there, and obviously the cam chain. Right, take the bike apart now. Okay guys, so that's the sort of top bit accessible now. Every bike you do is different, as you can imagine, so you have to sort of have a game plan as to how you're going to get in there and get the cam cover off. Obviously I've done a gazillion of these over the years, so I know the process well, but that's as far in as the top as we need to go, and then I need to get the radiator dropped forward just so I can get access to the front, and then the cam cover will actually come out this way through the, well, it could go out past, if the radiator and oil cooler weren't there, it could go out the front, but the way I do these, and other people might have a different opinion, is get the throttle buddies back out of the way and I pull the cover out through the front and then just drop the rad forward to give me a little bit more access around the cams. That way I haven't got to drain the coolant out of it. If it was having a coolant change, I'd probably just get the radiator out of the way completely, but in this instance I don't really want to have to drain the coolant if I can avoid it. Anyway, crack on now, radiator forward, and then we'll get this cam cover off. Come on, you know you want to. You bastard. Whoa, shaky camera. Right, top tip time. When you... Oh, not the fucking camera. Seriously? Keep still. Really? Right, top tip time. Whenever you're taking the cam cover off, you've got to be really careful that there's no sort of little stones, or bikes have a habit of collecting all sorts of rubbish on top of cam covers and around the bolts that hold it on. So you just got to make sure there's no like big bits of grit or any grit or anything that's going to drop in when you pull the cam cover off. Kind of... Oh, that camera's shaking, isn't it? Sorry, guys. Sounds like common sense, but you'd be surprised at the number of people that have pulled a cam cover off and filled their engine up with sand or grit or something. So just pay attention around the edges where the gasket seals, around where the bolts are, just so no shit drops inside when you pull the cover off. These are normally quite easy to come off. Tappity tappity. God, it doesn't even need tapping. Wiggle wiggle. And it should... We might go out through the front actually, now the rad's really far forward. Be easier. There we go. Now then, I'm going to take the engine cover off to the side. Actually, no, what I'm going to do, and this is another top tip, I'll take the blanking plug out so we can rotate the engine on the other side. I don't care how good you are, or how many engines you've rebuilt, or what a superb mechanic you think you are. Whenever you're taking cams out, always just eyeball the cam timing marks. Just refresh it in your mind. I mean, I've done so many of these, and I reckon I could do them in my sleep. But even now, I still just get the TDC mark on the crank and just look at the cam positions and just refresh it in my mind. Maybe I'm a bit OCD, but it just seems like the sensible way of doing it, that. Anyway, to the side. Yikes, all the paint is coming off it. What size is that? 14mm. Right, so we need... Oh wait, we need top dead centre on number 1 cylinder with the cam lobes facing outwards. Might not mean anything to you, but it means something to me. I'm going to get my head in shot now. So there's this clearly isn't a how-to, but there's a little index mark on this cover here, and then there's a T mark on the... Well, there's a T and an F mark. One's a fire mark, one's a top dead centre mark. So the T mark gets lined up on this rotor with a little mark on the cover, which is there. And then we make sure the cam lobes on number 1 cylinder are facing apart. And then, if everything's correct, I won't bother getting too... Let me see if I can do this in one shot. So... See that mark there on the camshaft? It actually says EX somewhere on that cam. So that there is up, camera up. So you can see that mark if I get dead straight on. And then same on the, it's hard to film, same on the inlet cam. Down in there, but it's difficult to see with the camera. So that's that. Then what I'm going to do actually before I take this apart, and this is not a top tip, but this is something you should be doing really, if ever you're removing camshafts for any reason, good idea to do the valve clearances at the same time, because to change shims, valve shims, you obviously need to remove the cams, so it would be a missed opportunity if you weren't to do the valve clearances. So I'm just going to measure the valve clearances quick, and then we'll pull these cams and take this engine cover off on this side here, down here. Yeah, so we're going to remove this cover to get the cam chain out. Blooming keep knocking the camera. So what we'll do is we'll take this cover off. There's a 14mm bolt there through the end of the crankshaft, and there's a rotor for the pickup. You'll see as the cover comes off. Get that rotor out of the way, and then the chain, once the cams are out, the chain will drop down and we can pull the chain out through here. So while I'm in the vicinity of this cam chain tensioner, let's zoom in there a little bit. Sorry, dodgy filming. So this up here, this is the cam chain tensioner. So for those of you that don't know what this is, and most of you probably do, so what we've got here is, hang on, let's zoom back out. So there's obviously there's a chain running, a cam chain running all the way around here, like the cam belt on your car, only this is a chain. Well, some cars have cam chains, not belts, but most people know about cam belts. So there's a chain running from the crankshaft here, which is driving the two camshafts, double overhead cam. This chain needs to be tensioned, so there's a mechanism here called the cam chain tensioner, and I know this is old news to most of you, but some of you might not know. And then inside here, we'll see it from the top in a minute, there's a tensioning blade, which is a blade that pivots from the, pivots from the bottom on these, I think, not the top. Sometimes there's a pivot point, and then the blade can move backwards and forwards, and this pushes on the blade, and basically the tensioner blade rubs on the chain and keeps the chain tight. And on the other side here, there's a guide which doesn't move, which is made of the same material. Anyway, I waffle, so let's get this cover off. And actually, no, let's not get this cover off. I'm going to leave that cover on. I'm just going to do the valve clearances quickly, as I said. Then we'll pull this cover. So no great big surprises with the valve clearances particularly. And as I keep saying, it's not a how-to, but just rotate the engine. Clearances on these are 6 thou on the inlet, 9 thou on the exhaust, plus or minus 1 thou. So you just go through and then record your clearances, and then if they are out, when you pop the cams, you can lift your shim bucket out and measure your shim and swap your shims and blah blah blah. Anyway, onwards. Right, valve clearances. Oh, there's a rabbit hole we could go down. So there's a lot of ambiguity if you're not careful with using a feeler gauge to measure a clearance. So I use and I don't think I invented this, but this is what I call it. I call it the go, won't go principle. So for example, this number 1 exhaust cam is in the right place now to measure the clearance. I've got a 9 and a 10mm feeler gauge. The perfect clearance, and I'm using this one because most of them actually, this is a textbook example, lovely Honda engineering, all the clearances are good, but so the 9 thou feeler gauge will go in with a little bit of resistance. I haven't got to use any force particularly to push it in. And then the 10 thou, which I've just managed to lose back in my load of feeler gauges, 1 second. And you'll need to find feeler gauges in 1 thou increments to use this principle. Most feeler gauges are imperial, metric rather, and they're 0.05 of a mil increments, which is 2 thou. Have I got that right? I think that's right. Anyway, this is a 10 thou. I waffle. This is a 10 thou feeler gauge, and I could force it in, but it doesn't want to go. So we know that that's a 9 thou, and that takes the if you're sort of trying to feel your way around it, if that makes sense, you're adding a variable. So just use light pressure, keep going up the feeler gauges, it goes in, goes in, goes in, and then the next size won't go, and then you know where you are in terms of size. Anyway, so valve clearances are all good. So when I do valve clearances like this, obviously you've got to record your clearances, so just write them on a piece of paper. I've got some valve check sheets that I use. So they're all good. If they weren't, I'd obviously have to pop shim buckets up and change shims. Anyway, I'm waffling. So cams out next. Now to remove the cams, load of bolts here. Let me go and get the tool I'm going to use, and I'll talk a little bit about that quickly. Here's a tool I love to hate. Air ratchet. So in my opinion, pretty limited application for this sort of tool really where motorbikes are concerned. It's handy because it's really good at undoing things quickly that are in awkward places, but you basically lose any finesse you've got. It's just like, I will fucking snap this bolt off for you. So what I tend to do is just crack because it's a ratchet, you can just you can crack the bolts and then use the ratchet to buzz them out. Never ever ever, in my opinion, use one for assembly because it takes all the finesse away. There's no feel, you know. If a thread starts to pick up or there's a problem, you're just going to fucking snap the bolt off without even realising. Anyway, I'm going to undo all these. Let's talk about, I've just used that bolt there as an example because it was easy to get to. Let's talk about how to take these cams out, and it's turning into a how-to, isn't it? Sorry, I can't help myself. Obviously you want the cams to come up nice and evenly. You don't want to just undo all the bolts on one side. And for those of you that don't know, if one of the cams is opening a valve, there's a valve spring which is pushing up on the camshaft. Let's say for instance number 4 cylinder here, inlet cam is pushing down on the inlet valve. If I started undoing all these bolts on this side, it would fucking bend this aluminium piece, which is one piece up, and it'd end up breaking something here. So you've got to undo each bolt. I know I've undone that one all the way, but I was just showing you the air ratchet. Undo them all, you know, work your way around in order. What I tend to do is do these 6 in the centre and then use these 4, do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and sort of eke the cam up nice and gently. Anyway, onwards. Right, cover removal. Here's a top tip I was just thinking about when I was taking those cams out. Disconnect the battery. I once saw a guy with a bike in a motorbike shop, cams out, engine like this, cam chain just sort of hanging there doing nothing, dropped a socket on the starter solenoid, and it didn't have its little protective cover over it, shorted the starter motor out to the battery. Engine started spinning over with the cam chain all piling down in here, and it smashed the case in, and oh my good lord. So yeah, disconnect the battery if you're taking cams out, because if the engine turns, you're in big trouble. Right, so you can see the guide that I was talking about earlier. This is basically a straight nylon thing that the chain runs on, and then this here, see, this one is moving. It pivots from up above, and that's what tensions the chain. As the cam chain tensioner pushes on it, it tensions the chain. Does that make sense? Anyway, let's drop this chain down now, and if we wiggle this gear like so and get the chain off, I can drop the chain down like that, and out it comes. Incidentally, if you are actually doing one of these yourself, there's a cam position sensor in the side of the crankcase you've got to take off to be able to drop this chain down. But anyway, it's not a how-to, as I always keep saying. Wanted to show you the old tensioner. So without getting into the weeds, let's get that in the middle of the shot. Without getting into the weeds, basically the way this works, there's a coil spring in here. Let me take the end off this actually, and I'll get a screwdriver in it and explain a little bit. Right, I'm back. Now I'm going to attempt to explain what's going on here. A lot of you know exactly what you're looking at. Some of you haven't got a clue, possibly. So this here, this chain I've just pulled out, which is was on this gear. This is the end of the crankshaft, which goes round and round with conrods and pistons and blah blah blah. This chain, as it turns, is driving the camshafts round and round, which in turn are opening and closing the valves. Anyway, we're here because this chain, when the engine's running, this chain is slapping backwards and forwards and making a cam chain noise. The noise you can hear is this chain chattering around against this tensioner blade and this guide. So as I said before, this is a fixed guide, this is the tensioner blade. So, cam chain tensioners. So let me get this in shot. Right, so this is Honda's generally preferred way. Is that in focus? I think it might be. So this is the old cam chain tensioner. So see, you've got a screwdriver in the end here. If I turn this screwdriver, the cam chain tensioner, see as I turn, I'm not sure that's in focus. It's hard, I've got really oily fingers. Let me put my thumb on there. So as I turn this tensioner goes in, look. Now if I keep some pressure with my thumb, take the screwdriver out, there's a coil spring in there that's wound up now. It's got a load of tension on, and there's a threaded rod inside that's trying to screw around and push this rod out. So as I let my finger off, it's pushing quite hard and it won't go back in. I can't push it back in because of the way it's designed inside. See what I mean? So why is it rattling? Let me see if I can get that to focus a bit better. Maybe it's just exposed differently. Right, so why is it rattling? So what happens is, as this chain wears, so this is 26,000 miles, this chain's been round and round quite a few times. So like with a drive chain, as it wears, the chain gets longer, it stretches slightly, which in turn means that this tensioner, so when the bike's new, or the chain's new, and the guides are new, everything's new and hunky-dory, this tensioner is almost all the way in. I've got a red light flashing on my camera, which is really annoying me. What is that about? Anyway, so when the bike's new, this tensioner is all the way in, like that, and then as the chain wears and the guides wear, this tension gets further and further out. And as it gets further out, the spring has less energy, and it gets to a point where it can't really push that much more, and then the chain starts to stretch a little bit more, get a little bit more wear on these guides, and then what starts to happen is it starts to slap backwards and forwards ever so slightly. You can hardly hear it, and that movement in turn wears the tensioner. See, it's got that movement in it. So it's been sat in that place. You can actually see whether it'll come out on the camera, but see this shiny section here on this rod, it's basically been stuck in that position for quite a while, and the mechanism inside is worn. So right, let's get to the fix, because I'm in danger of really waffling here. So the absolute textbook fix, if you listen to Honda, is new tensioner, because the spring loses its energy over time, new chain, which we're going to put in, a new tensioner blade, which is this one, and a new guide. In reality, you don't get a lot of wear on the guide and the tensioner blade, so you generally don't replace those. What some people do, when they've got a rattly cam chain, is they just put a cam chain tensioner in, which in the short term will fix it. It'll stop it rattling, because the new tensioner, it's got a fresh spring in it, so it's got a little bit more energy, because the spring has lost some energy over time, and it hasn't got this wear in the mechanism. And what that'll do, a new tensioner on its own, it'll shut it up for an amount of mileage. You know, it might be quiet again for 10,000 miles till the chain gets to such a point where it's so worn that the tension is almost at the end of its travel, and it's game over then. So I waffle. So the fix really is chain and tensioner if you've got a rattly cam chain, unless something's catastrophically gone wrong with the tensioner and it is just the tensioner, but that's not normally the case. It's normally a worn chain and a worn out tensioner. Anyway, I'm waffling. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was reasonably interesting for you. I'm going to stop filming now because I really got to pull my finger out and get this job actually done. I've been messing around trying to film it. I'm so out of practice using my camera and whatnot, as you know. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll... oh, was that a shake? I've got, God, it shakes. I'm holding it at a funny angle, that's what it is. Get the blood back in my arm. Anyway, right, so I'll see you on the next one. Cheers, guys. Bye. All back together. Clear prop. Thanks for watching, guys. See you on the next one.